Okay, dear colleagues, let's start for the next session. So what we will be doing in the next hour is to address a number of interesting questions, and the focus we will have is on a transversal skill or a set of transversal skills in cultural heritage work and hence education to address the significance of heritage for society and even the planet, and to question people on how heritage questions and dialogues with contemporary challenges. So that's a complex and abstract and ambiguous question. And what people used to do in antiquity, in ancient Greece and the neighboring regions, what they used to do more than 2 millennia ago when they had to deal with these very difficult, complex and important questions, was to go to a place called Delphi and there consult the oracle. And it's a good idea at the end of this research project to also consult Delphi. You probably know the story. What was there was, according to a number of stories, was that a lady was sitting on a tripod and there were vapors coming out of from below in the temple of Apollo. This lady got into a trance and gave a number of cryptic answers. And there were a number of priests of the temple of Apollo that were interpreting the question and explaining what it was about. And I think the organizers of this session had a very good idea to consult Delphi again. And unfortunately, we could not all go to Delphi. But luckily we are in Barcelona, which is also extremely nice. But they managed to get someone from Delphi, Penny Colombozo, and she is, I'm not sure if she is the oracle or the interpreter, or you will explain us, but she will help us to answer these questions. What kind of skills do we need to answer these very difficult questions? So Penny, she has a bachelor and master both in tourism and museum studies, and important, she's a licensed tourist guide, and she works both in the tourism sector and with heritage, especially in Delphi. So the floor is yours. So we're very interested to hear your answers that we need for our project.
Kalispera, hello, Aula. Thank you so much for having invited me. This is one of these rare cases when we have such an interesting discussion, which is coming from all different fields. So first of all, I'd like to thank you so much for what you do, preserving our more common or less common heritage, because that way I can communicate what you do to people and try get them involved in what you do. And my privilege is that I usually connect with people coming from all over the world, having lots of different backgrounds, and that's what makes it so interesting. Because in the end of the day, if you have your ears and eyes open, you can always make it contemporary, and that way you can help them understand why heritage matters. Why does it matter? And that's very important. And we're discussing not only young people, we're discussing older people. And in this way, they keep coming back. And that's important because we've got repeat visitors. And this is something that counts. So I'm sorry for this, but I don't see very well, so probably you see very big letters. So hopefully you can understand that as well. And in ancient Greek, my work is exegetes. This is how they called us, those who interpret. I'd like to add that it's not like those who interpret, it's also those who learn from the questions people ask. And that's what I try to do. I try make people think, I try make them ask questions. And how can I do this? I can do this if I develop empathic communication skills, become what they are, and it's a dynamic approach. And the moment you have them smiling at you is the moment you attracted their attention. And immediately they feel free to connect. And there is a mutual benefit in what I do, because in the end, we both gain a lot from such a visit. Now, our case study is Delphi, and Delphi is one of those UNESCO sites, and what I find also very important is for people to understand why it's in the list. They rarely read the criteria, and there are 10 different criteria, and Delphi meets 5 out of 10, and 1 on 3 out of 5 concern the natural landscape, and immediately that stresses a point, how important our environment is. And apart from this, how important it is also to preserve it and go back in time and see how people interacted with their natural environment in order to come up with ideas of gods. So what you heard about vapors, this is how it all began. But the more complicated we become, the different we understand gods, and that's an amazing evolution in the way people think. So this is what we usually start with, the reason why it's in the list of UNESCO, what does it mean? And my task is to inspire them to understand how other people think on the same subject. I told you before, they come from all over, so we might agree on things, but the approach is different. And to help them make the best out of their visit, and to create a meaningful, lived and lifelong learning experience. I emphasize lifelong. It's very important. And that's the reason why I always choose different topics. I mean, they have to be very contemporary. We can always discuss things, and it's a lifelong experience to them and to me. So to motivate them to research more once they go back home, and they research more and they travel more, and that's very important. Now, the very first keynote is one I enjoy a lot because I look at people's faces, and in the very beginning they are very much surprised. And then we start discussing and try and make it relevant to them, and language matters. Here we are, and we all speak different languages, and you do know how difficult it is to do what? To interpret words from one language to the other, and still be very accurate with what you say. And apart from this, there is such a different context in whatever you discuss. So it's not just emoticons, it's language, and language matters. So we've got those statues in our museum. You probably know them. This is what we call a Kouros statue. And usually this raises lots of enthusiasm. Let me call it enthusiasm. And always guards are annoyed, and they tell people, put your hands down, please behave. So this was my observation. Why, although we're surrounded by so many images of men and women having no clothes on, why do people get so much excited when it comes to these naked statues? And then slowly, step by step, I realized language matters, and in Greek there is just one meaning, naked, gymnos, and in English you call it nude. Not in all languages, nude. And what's nude? It's art. This is no picture of any real person, it's not a portrait. This is art, that's the artistic representation of what they called kalos kagathos, the one who has the perfect balance physically, mentally, and whatever you discuss when it comes to the ancient Greek culture has to be placed within a very specific context, most of the times political context. And that's interesting again because in our case, the marketing industry, what does it do? It turns values into commodities and commodities into values. And this is what I find really disappointing because in the end of the day, we look, do we see? We see, do we look? So there is a paradox. What do we really do when we go to the exhibitions? What do we see? Now, this is what I usually do to connect with people coming from lots of different backgrounds. And I always try and make it relevant to them, regardless where they come from. On one hand, you've got the Greek Kouros statues from the 6th century BC, communicating totally different values and things. And then on the other hand, you've got some latest issues that concern the other continent, America, discussing whether David should be presented to students or not. And that I found very interesting again, because that has to do with educating people how to see. We have to include more arts in our education. We do have. It makes people more creative and tolerant. I'm telling you this because another very interesting observation made by the director of the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence concerning the incident with the students in Florida and their frustrated parents is that she then said, but in the end of the day, we've got so many naked statues in our cities. What are we supposed to do? Close them down? So is it porn or is it art? So these are amazing questions to ask in modern times because that's what's happening elsewhere. And then I went to an exhibition. What exhibition? That was in Athens, celebrating 1821, the War of Independence, and the contribution of the Americans to the Greek War of Independence. And there it was, another interesting concept of nudity. And how did they call it? She's clothed in Christian piety. And I was like, the next time you tell me it's Greek to you, I'm gonna wonder. It's American to me. Or English, if it's nude. Why am I telling you that? It's a very interesting exhibition. You might find the catalog because it makes connections with the way people understood the West in the 19th century. And that's the contribution of the Americans. The sculptor who made that statue was the one who tried to empathize with what was happening in Greece in the 19th century and the War of Independence. So he depicted as a Greek slave a young girl that looked like Aphrodite. I don't think that's how Greek women looked like in the 19th century. And he had her standing without clothes on. And in the 19th century, having such a statue in America, first of all, it raised questions concerning slavery. Is this Greek slavery? Is it black slavery? What kind of slavery are we discussing? And the second issue discussed was whether she's naked or nude. So that was fascinating to me, because I'm used to Kouros statues, a lot of nudes. And then we come back to our continent now, we come back to Europe. And that was another interesting incident when we've got the Iranian visitor, we don't have to give the names, who visited the Vatican Museum, and the authority of the museum decided to do what? Do you remember? Because these are recent things happening. So that was to cover the statues. And I liked a lot the cartoon they made because the media went crazy. I mean, I really don't want a thing of that happening in Greece. Can you imagine our beautiful statues covered? And what did they do in the cartoon? And you can see there, it provoked emotion, because art provokes emotion. And that's why I'd like to see art, and this is how I try to use it in my job, so to show to people how different approaches there are. But they have to study, they have to learn in order to examine all these kinds of things. And what did the cartoon suggest? Italian solution, cover the statues, as opposed to logical solution. Leave statues alone and cover the eyes of the beholder. You choose. So my job is not to say what to do. I just want you to think. The next one, the second keynote, concerns the Oracle of Delphi. And the Oracle of Delphi, as you can read, is a wonderful place that gives context. It provides us with lots of inspiration. And it has the power to set our inner lives in motion. Now, at this point, I'd like you to read carefully what the Amphictyonic League stands for. Because as an individual, you cannot do very well. You always need someone to support your efforts made. And then it's interesting to see why would they need a center. And this is the Amphictyonic League. That was an ally. And that was also a league, and they were responsible for the administration of the Oracle of Delphi. And the most important thing they had to do was to try avoid conflict. So they were trying to solve problems not by weapons, but by discussion. And that's very important. Why is this important? And we move on to the next slide. Down below, you can see where Greeks had been in ancient times. And a tool to examine the meaning of the Oracle of Delphi is geography and geology. It's very important to understand the landscape. It's very important to understand where you are. And immediately people get motivated when they understand what the landscape is like and how did this shape the attitude of the people discussing economy, discussing their gods, because not everywhere people believe that the world was made by one male god within 7 days. So it's fascinating to notice that Greece is mountainous, 70% of it. The rest of it is rocky and then small isolated islands. So where do you expect them to starve? So that explains why our ancient Greek mythology has to do with geography. This is how to interpret myths. Jason and the Argonauts, this and the other, and it makes lots of sense. People get it immediately. And in the end, where is Delphi? Right in the middle. Why? Because this was the most convenient location for them to meet. And we started with Mother Earth because of the vapors. We continued with Poseidon because of the tectonic plates. I'm not going to tell you more. I hope you visit us in Delphi, and then I can show you more and tell you more. And then we continue with Apollo, who's the god of logic, reason. I don't think anyone starts with logic and reason. And poetry. And he in Delphi, only in Delphi, allowed space for his brother, Dionysus. You remember who Dionysus is? No. Yeah, drink a bit more wine and the other you comes out immediately. So if you have not met him yet, you are lying. And why am I telling you this? Because here in Delphi, we don't only have the balance, Dionysus, Apollo, but we also have the nymphs, spirits of nature, and the 9 muses. This is very important, because the muses are the goddesses of the arts and science. And this is exactly what formed a background cast for the performance of human life, shown on the pediments of the Temple of Apollo. It's important because heritage and identity were given a human face through the memorials to personal and cultural victories displayed at the Oracle of Delphi, yet these days, such dramatic demonstrations of power challenge elementary school students' understanding of history, and they ask, is this a sacred site or a war museum? And why am I telling you this? Because the moment you come to Delphi is the moment when you go through all these different memorials, and one defeated the other, and they don't get it. And what do muses have to do with it? The muses are the daughters of Zeus and memory. Memory matters, because what are we without our memories? Are we the lost souls in the kingdom of the dead? Memory matters, but it's not there, so to justify what happened, or to take responsibility out of it. We always need to keep some distance from the past. We can only learn. And yesterday, I was in the meeting, and someone said we have to entertain. Yes, we have to entertain, but we have to educate as well, and that's exactly what museums should be. A place to do what? Edutainment, educate and entertain at the same time, and that's the job of the muses. But how can you do it if you don't allow people ask questions? I'm telling you all this because I'd call them codes of ethics. And this is something we should not forget. We need codes of ethics. And I'll tell you why. Because another fascinating thing concerning the Oracle of Delphi is the name given to the god Apollo, and that's the only place where he was called Loxias. What does it mean? Not even Greeks remember the meaning of that name. The one who doesn't give direct answers. So, Mr. Lewis, if you think I'm here to give you any direct answer, no, that's not my job. Why am I telling you this? Because the Oracle of Delphi was there to educate people, educate highly competitive people, and you understand why they were highly competitive, because they never had enough land and enough means, and I'm not gonna starve, yes, but there comes a moment when it's not only about how to survive, it's greed. And these are these 147 maxims written on the Temple of Apollo, like know thyself, avoid the extremes. And the fundamental myth in Europe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the story of Prometheus. So this helps us analyze what? Our human nature. I expect everything from you. That's the Dionysian aspect. The question is, how can I educate you and let you know of the consequences? You don't have to. This is the story of Daedalus and Icarus. And Icarus gave his son wings to fly, and give me wings to fly and bye-bye. But what did he tell his son? Do you remember? Or close to the sea. Not because you cannot, but why shouldn't you? Because an unexamined life is not a life worth living. I think someone mentioned it earlier this morning. And this is very important. Moderation is important. Why? Because we're humans and we always think for the short term. The question is, who's going to think for the long term? That's the job of the Oracle of Delphi. All these people didn't come to Delphi to get a direct answer from the Oracle of Delphi. That's not its job. It's to make people think. And that's important now because Prometheus, having given us fire, as I say to people and they always laugh, it's not like I go home and I give my kids a lighter and tell them, bye-bye, good luck with it, guys. How irresponsible. I'm not going to give you more examples concerning modern issues involved. Giving kids tools, and it's not their responsibility to use them well. Give me fire, and I change the world, and that's my job. It's in my DNA. It's in my DNA. I'm unstoppable. Give me fire, and I change the world. Humans of nature. Humans are the humans of nature. We're the masters of the universe. But that's exactly it. Up to what extent? Who's going to think for the long term? Fire is a tool. It's also a weapon. We discuss it all the time. How are we going to use it? As a tool or as a weapon? 5 minutes, I've finished. And this is the thing again. Right, so this is the very last thing I want to say before I sum up everything, is that that's the reason why they came up with the idea of the competitions, and that's another very challenging thing. In ancient times, Greeks didn't have second or third place, only one shall win. Sorry for this, I'm a hunter, but teach your hunter how to hunt. And this is another thing again. Do you want to see our life as an arena full of brutality and blood, or do you want to see our life as a stadium where good fights are given? So the moment you're about to kill the other person, you step back, control yourself, and say, thank you for the good fight. Because if you can practice that in the games, why can you not practice it in real life? So to finish with, I shall summarize like this. Every question asked is not just every question asked by our guests give meaning to my job as an intermediary of history and culture. We do have enough experience to make better choices for the future. Therefore, if we think that our ancestors behaved wrongly, we have plenty of knowledge to do better. Yet, does this better future concern us all or some individuals? Whether it's inner battles or outer battles, we must always fight the good fight, because as Pericles stated in his funeral oration, what you leave behind is not just names engraved in stone, monuments, but what is preserved in the memories of people in homeland, also in foreign countries, also woven into their hearts and lives. I feel this is how heritage can help us reflect on contemporary challenges. And I presented there some pictures I've made with tattoos, Know Thyself, Icaros. People by themselves showed me, look, Penny, look what I've got. Grandmother and kid, and then students. And then it's me with Justin. Thank you. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you do.
Thank you very much, Penny, for this multi-layered story. She basically also challenged you to ask questions, so she's really open for questions, but we will wait for 15 minutes. But think about questions you want to ask Penny, and do challenge her. She has her own opinion about this relation between heritage, tourism, and so on, so please ask her afterwards. So prepare questions. Before we go to this question, we have a second speaker. I don't know if Patrick wants to be called an oracle. You probably want to be called an interpreter, because that's, as you are now, Mr. Interpret. Now also responsible in Interpret Europe. And Patrick, as we have known, the people who have been following Charter, he came back several times emphasizing this role of interpretation in heritage. And Patrick, the floor is yours to convince us once again.
One moment. Yes. So, I will talk a bit more theoretically, a bit more abstract, about more general tendencies regarding how we interrogate or can interrogate contemporary challenges from heritage mediation or interpretation and vice versa. I think that's a two-way process, and something that does not lead to the simple answers, but raises more questions probably. So what we have experienced during the last decades is a shift of social paradigms in Western societies in Europe, that sensitivity to discrimination and colonialism has increased, that we went from authority-driven top-down approaches to participatory planning and governance in the large picture in societies. This was a trend at least. Recognition of people in their diversity of identities and diversity of cultures, cultural backgrounds, and a growing acceptance of environmental concerns and social sustainable development, the need for sustainable development. All this seemed to be a rather straightforward development until rather recently, let's say until the last decade around. And in the same time, we had also interrelated with this a shift in the heritage paradigm, which was very well described in work package 2 here, from an idea that heritage has an inherent meaning and intrinsic values to the understanding that there are diverse meanings and values ascribed to heritage by different people. And from an economic justification of heritage management, heritage measures, to people-centered, so that well-being of people and societies becomes the main purpose of heritage and heritage interpretation. And from conservation-centered to understanding heritage as a platform for dialogue and discourse. All these developments were interrupted more and more through multiple challenges and crises. I pick out one now, the so-called refugee crisis, where we had where we could see a welcome culture on the one hand side in some parts of European societies. That's here the left picture, and resentment and anti-migration and anti-refugee manifestations on the other hand. All this is a backlash which we experienced with populism that won democratic votes like Brexit and Trump, and by stoking anti-globalist and anti-EU sentiment, that conspiracy myths, and that's interesting that we had talked about myths, that conspiracy myths became rather popular in many parts of society, like anti-corona vaccination, climate change skepticism, anti-green, anti-science sentiments. And we experienced increasing polarizations and fragmentation within communities, between communities, and between countries, which recently led to war. So what's behind that? One thing is that we experience all an increasing complexity and an accelerated change, that these shifting paradigms might have caused backlash recently maybe because of confusion of minds, because people lost orientation, because old certainties and orientations are getting lost, and trust in old institutions is getting lost, and many lose trust in reality and in human reason. An interesting thing was to discover that Freeman Tilden, an author who is quoted very often as a father, godfather of heritage interpretation. He wrote this book, Interpreting Our Heritage, in 1957. And he already has some kind of foreshadowing or some kind of feeling about what might explain these developments. So he wrote that generally speaking, certainties contribute toward human happiness. Uncertainties are a source of spiritual loneliness and disquietude. And this was at the place where he also introduces, aims to create understanding of why people come to heritage sites, heritage places, natural and cultural heritage. And he continued, whether or not he is conscious of it, man seeks to find his place in nature and among men. And that's what dealing with heritage, experiencing heritage can help. Of course, that's written in the language which would not be appropriate today anymore, but the idea is that it is heritage that can help us reflect and reflect about our place in the world among other people and within nature. And this is a similar purpose as what had happened in Delphi in the antique times. Now this is in the heritage interpretation from then evolved as a professional field. You can study that in university master degree courses in the English-speaking countries, North America, Australia, also in the UK. And this quote here led to one tendency, so one conclusion, that as interpreters who tell people about the past and heritage, explain people to heritage, heritage to people, we must reduce complexity. We must keep it simple. And this led to an approach which is called thematic interpretation, so to direct the entire narrative of an interpretation towards a single central theme, which should be stated as a simple but complete sentence, like everything is streamlined towards a thesis or a message. And this is probably a dangerous thing as we look today, because this idea to keep everything simple, stupid, reduction of complexity, this is the exact recipe of populism and what makes it so successful. And we can see that interpretation sometimes used with this approach similar strategies and similar methods as the populists do, and that's a very dangerous thing. So we saw that we need to rethink our own role. So the dilemma is that Tilden is right. Really, many people prefer the easy to grasp certainties about their place in a beautiful world. That's what they want to hear. But on the other hand, as you can experience, probably when you look at the current contemporary challenges, and how many politicians deal with it, and who seek to be voted, to be elected, that you might also experience disquietude from a feeling that too simple stories or false certainties might miss the crucial points. And because the realities in our century are complex and the risks are real, so we cannot avoid them, and ignorance can have fatal consequences. So we started to rethink what is our role and what new competences and skills we need as those who work at the interface between heritage and the greater public by doing guided tours, exhibitions, and so on, so who interpret heritage. Because when you look carefully what is interpretation practice, you can find many examples where an exhibition in famous museums might inadvertently undermine social development, sustainable development goals, or social cohesion and peace, because they often just repeat what were the views and the perspectives of the past, and they activate values then that are the reason for some of the problems we have today. So we also have to face that heritage is today weaponized in culture wars on people's minds, and we see this in how Ukrainian heritage is interpreted by Russians, for example, and we see this in many contentious heritage sites, how it may be interpreted very differently, and we need to prepare ourselves to act in such a situation as defenders of human reason and democracy and plurality, plurality of view, points of view. So the new role and responsibility we have to ask ourselves, how can we interpret heritage in an inclusive way that promotes mutual understanding in polarized societies? And how can we overcome bias, stereotypes, and cliché, including, and first and foremost, our own ones, because many of the problems, that's the discussion of colonialism, many of the old ways of interpreting and presenting heritage was full of the bias of those who told these stories. But this raises new questions how to deal with this in a good way, and how, as a next step, how can we help others to do the same, to discover their own biases and stereotypes if we want to foster mutual understanding in a society that is polarizing rather than becoming united in diversity. So that's the recent trend. So one thing is that we need to reach beyond people's comfort zone, because transformations to sustainable development and social justice and to a more peaceful work, all that begins in the human mind. You know probably the slogan of UNESCO, that since war begins in the mind of human beings or of men, we need to build the defenses of peace in human minds. And we need better skills to encourage people to critical reflection and transformative learning. And as those who work at this interface, we need to become educational specialists in meaning making. So one approach is interpretation from multiple perspectives that can deliberately counter preconceived meanings, like we had heard that they deliberately address the American group differently than those who come from other countries, because you know that they have certain cliches maybe, and that for them it's good also in this situation to get new insights, which they can, and new learning opportunities that can come from this heritage. To provoke people to discover their own misunderstandings or false information over simplifications through engaging them in the interpretation process through talking and dialogue, and to provoke target groups to reconsider their value priorities. So this involves that we need advanced mediation skills to identify and resolve misunderstandings between different visitor groups or groups who are partners in co-creation processes. And this means we need to be able to actively listen and to support participants in such processes to express themselves more clearly, because this is not co-creation in a diverse group does not work automatically. It needs advanced skills, and to advance respect for opposing views, and at the same time to firmly but tactfully challenge factual wrongs, stereotypes, cliches, and incoherent interpretations. And this is a question how we find the right balance in this. A new challenge we did not have. So in order to do that, we need to be more precise in our understanding of what is actually interpretation as a basic mental activity of meaning-making in each individual's mind, what happens in dialogue and discourse, how people digest what they, not only what they see, but also what they hear from others, and as collective meaning-making processes, and what is the role and the limits of participation, co-creation, mediation, and presentation techniques. And all this is what heritage interpretation as a professional expertise needs to further develop, I think. But all this also matters to other heritage professionals who are working in conservation, management, and so on, because they all have to involve, according to the new approaches, they all have to involve different audiences with different backgrounds and different value priorities. We had very often this problem that we had an implicit assumption that everybody thinks rather similarly than we do. Now, one instrument, I will not go into that more clearly, is we call it value compass, which shows that everybody has in their minds basic human values like power, security, peace, universalism values like freedom, like justice, being in line with the nature and environment, and so on and so on. And these are interrelated in two polarities. So one polarity is self-enhancing values, and on the other side, self-transcending values. The other one is conservation, which triggers probably something for many of us, and openness to change. And all these need to find a balance. And we can use these things to structure our interpretation and also our ways how we engage with different target groups, target audience, different people in a way that is inspiring, beneficial, relates to them, and provokes them to reflect. So maybe so far.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So you listened to Penny and Patrick. So first, if you have questions about their presentations, so they both challenged you, they discussed important issues that are more important than ever today. So we are all mediators, interpreters, and so on. So please help me by asking questions, so you can. And we have one person to break the ice. Fantastic. But please think about, and then Louis and the others, it's now or never. So please think about questions. You have these two wonderful specialists here.
Thank you. My question is for Penny. And just a curiosity, because you started this presentation by showing us interesting images that would get us think about nudity, about naked nude, all these, that would really spark a conversation. So because your example was referring to an outdoor site, to the temple of Delphi, are you using visual aids while you do that kind, or are you just using your knowledge, your empathy, as you said, your commitment, your passion? So I was a bit confused by the fact that you use these images to begin with, and so what do you do to really get people involved and talking and interested? And
it's on now. Thank you. The statue, the Kouros statue, is in the Museum of Delphi. So usually what we do is to visit both the site and the museum. So that way I can make the connection, because these were all standing at the site. So where you now see bases and there is nothing there, at least they can connect with what was in the museum. So this is how I do it. Otherwise, if I have to, because I always try help people imagine, but how can you imagine if you don't have any background knowledge? I have pictures with me. It's not easy to use those digital things, because we've got many applications. It's not easy. Why not? Because all these sites are outdoors and it's hard to walk. And especially when they get busy, then you lose attention and it might be risky. So I prefer using the traditional pictures A4, and that's good enough. Not too many of them, just some to trigger off their imagination and go back and do more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. My question is connected to the last words of Patrick, when he asked about the other professional heritage, not the official interpreters, not the guides, which is, for me, the most important issue. Because how we translate the deep understanding, because we do research, we know very well our own specialization, and sometimes our difficulty is to be able, and that's why we talk about the transversal skills that touch everyone. How are we able to simplify in a way that the other members of our team, not just the general audience, also other professionals, understands us, in order that our complexity is well translated in a way that we can work with others, and we can transform this to open questions, not our through against the through of the other specialist, but our open question, in order that we can create your knowledge in order to ask contemporary questions. Because the way you design a museography, the way you decide to choose which kind of thing you will preserve and which asset that you won't preserve for the next generations, this is full of stereotypes in our mind, and even what is heritage today is a cultural construction that during generations, the elites, we decided what does, and how we transform that in order to maintain the key questions that Penny was asking us. Key questions were true 2,000 years ago, but are still today important because as human beings, we are, as the compass shows us, this kind of contradictory animals. I don't think this, that, but in a gate, yes, animals. So, up to you.
There's no standard answer to this. What we need to do first is to understand their background, their point of view, what could be their concerns, or what is their what drives them in their opinions or their questions they have. And this works through dialogue. One thing is whether you have a technical discussion with somebody else in the team, a specialist, or the other thing is whether you ask about why is something more significant than the other one, why do we focus on this one and not on that one. And here a big problem is, or what we do in heritage interpretation, what we advocate for is to involve different ordinary people who have a relationship to this heritage site, but who might have different relationships to a heritage site, like people from the local community, people who have a different point of view because their ancestors were related to this site very differently because they were victims maybe of something that happened there, and bring them all together in a discourse or a dialogue to understand their different points of view in their words also. And then the next thing would be to transfer this and to bring these points of view as they are legitimate to these colleagues who have a more scientific and technical point of view, and try to convey a basic understanding that interpretation of heritage, what is meaningful for whom, why, is something that has to do with different people, and that they are not the only ones, and we are not the only ones to decide that.
Okay.
In a plural society.
Thank you very much. Before I pass the floor to Anna, I would like to ask Penny, because this question was addressed to heritage workers and the heritage sector, but I'm not sure if would you call yourself part of that sector, or because you told me earlier on that you are in the tourist industry. So, but for me, what you said makes perfect sense for heritage work. So I was wondering, how would you reply to what Louise asked? And could you tell, are you part of the tourists? And is there a problem of distinguishing the two or not? So how would you react? And would you call yourself a heritage worker or not?
I've got 30 years working experience. And my license is provided by the Ministry of Tourism. Yet my museum studies background helps me understand how difficult it is for you to do what you do, especially if you are a public institution. and you always have limited resources concerning staff, concerning exhibitions. On the other hand, tourism helps you raise some money, and when you decide what's a priority to you, you should also consult or discuss it with people in tourism and see how you can apply it in such a way so that it is beneficial to both. Tourism, by no means, should become, and there is a reason why I'm telling you this, a long story, tourism should not become the Trojan horse, the wooden horse. It's only a tool. It's a useful tool, but you have to know how to use it. And that's the reason why I think you have to start discussing what you do with people in tourism and the other way around. So that way, it's good for both, and especially for the people who trust what we do. Because one other thing I didn't have the time to explain is that the very first moment, and before I say bye-bye to the people I meet, is to thank them for the choice they made to visit us. To thank them because it's a choice. And this is important because you have to compete with many different fields in that entertainment industry. And I'm really sorry when agencies ask us to become entertainers. I'm an experience. Seriously? I'm an entertainer? Seriously? They didn't have fun? That's not what we are supposed to do. So this is the reason why we need to collaborate. So that's when the local community needs to be involved. This is when professionals need to be involved, and you from different disciplines have to start discussing with each other. It's fascinating how much you can do when you collaborate. Take a step back, think, go home, take the discussion back home, come back, reflect, and there will be common ground to make amazing exhibitions, and always to the point. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. I think, Anna, you had a question?
I want to thank you for this very interesting presentations. I think there should be a heritage professional in every parliament now in Europe. But I want to point out, I was thinking that heritage has always been used as a resource from the past that could be used for today needs. Thinking of the idea, remembered that Louis XIV, the Sun King, commissioned, when he first became king, commissioned a set of tapestries where he was depicted as Alexander the Great. He was trying to transmit, using the heritage, that he wanted to be a young and dynamic king. So to me, the problem is not that we use the past and reinterpret it. The problem to me now is that we use it for a base to hate speech. Hate speech, that we polarize, as you very well said, we polarize the world, interpreting heritage either black or white, and one cannot exist if the other exists, so incompatible. And so I think it's the work, it's an enormous work, and you very well explained it, how the grace, the complexity of heritage, if it's well interpreted, can help to understand the reality and become more democratic.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you very much,
please
Susan Core, and a very interesting panel, and also from today. And it's been also, we've been very much part of Charter, and out of even today, we're to look at the recommendations that we give to our different stakeholders, including the European Union, and how we are to simplify our message into simple statements. And this is a very complex thing to do. And maybe it is one of communication, but it's very difficult. And especially when our politicians also want simple answers or simple ways of funding these things. However, I'm just going to ask, I think one of the umbrellas that maybe will help us all is the fact that if we consider, we talk about the heritage sector and finding a meaning of heritage, but really ultimately what I'm taking from this, it's about sense making. We are making sense of our world. And if that is the message, it needs to be helped, it needs to be seen in this way, because it's not about what we have inherited from the past, it's about what we are inheriting. And so it's sense-making in that way. Do you think that is a way of making sense of this very complex field? Would you agree? And maybe we can look at our messages, our recommendations under that kind of umbrella. Does that make sense to you?
So the final slides I skipped. It was about making sense, that this is exactly the thing that is everybody does all the time. Everybody interprets all the time, every day, what you encounter. That is, if you perceive something, you try to make sense what it means and whether it is significant or not. And that's also how you can explain it to other colleagues with other scientific backgrounds. And there is, and this is the tricky thing, there is some aspects that are quite subjective. There are, but also some aspects that are universal, like we have seen, which did not change a lot over time, and bringing the concrete detail of today or the concrete question of today into contextualizing it in a way that it resonates with these universal ideas, universal values. That's what can create meaning, or can reveal meaning. We do not really create it also. That's also a difficult term to talk about that. And this is how everybody makes sense against the background of their own pre-understandings, which have been shaped during the social and cultural environments where they grew up and where they live, and their personal experiences which they reflected upon. So everybody is individual and different, and at the same time we share some universals, and this is the difficult thing to explain, really, how this works. And there's just not the time now to do that, to go deeper into that.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Other question? Okay, please.
Just one thing. You know how hard it is to write a text for museum use? Mm-hmm. Those of you working in museums, you know, right? You have to make it short, to the point. And you know how complicated it is. Who's gonna be the one reading it, right? That's a very complicated task. I can bring up many examples. Again, we play with language. Again, a language is the most important thing, an amazing tool. And I believe in exhibitions. Specific topics discussed, they're gonna start new ideas with something else. And those people who come to us, who are interested in heritage, in the heritage sector, are the people who are at this stage who want to make sense of themselves, of where they live. So this is our contribution to them. They want to make sense. Everything wants to make some sense. And especially young people, we need to help them make sense. This is a task.
The problem, or the challenge, or the difficulty is that people might make sense of things very quickly and very easily, but this is an oversimplification which causes problems later. And So one solution is, and that also close to what you said, is that we should not, as interpreters or also when talking with colleagues, give them the simple answers, but try to raise the deep questions in them that make them reflect again, and open questions that make them reflect again and look at the world in a different way. But these are not the simple answers for, let's say, for how do we approach politicians who want to have a clear statement. This is what how things have to be done.
And it's what we can offer. We need it, and it's what we can offer. How do we make it now that we have this opportunity?
And not only they want very short answers, but they want them now. Mm-hmm. It's like, yes. Wait a second, let's start from the very beginning.
Yes. And that's my problem often, that I would answer your question differently now than I did. This is
that yes and no. Yes
mm-hmm.
or no? No.
Yes.
Many wise lessons from antiquity and the present. Other questions? We still have 4 minutes. Please. Don't be shy. Yes, Astrid.
Thank you for your presentations. I really liked the variety of elements that you brought to the debate. My question is, it's all about storytelling. And I heard somebody saying, like, the politicians, they speak a different language and they want to have short answers and so on. But have you, I don't know, do you have experience in targeting politicians and bringing them to one of your tours, so to say? Because I think it's all about learning by doing. So if you immerse them, it might also help them to get a more, I don't know, holistic or different view on heritage.
Most of the times, I say, no, I'm not available. Because they either know in advance or they are in a hurry. And I can't stand it. But I do remember that it was a few years ago, I had to go to the site, and there was a very interesting surprise. Mr. Guterres, do I pronounce his name? Yeah. He was there. And what's the coincidence? They had just finished a discussion, a meeting in Turkey, and on his way to, not Greece, he stopped to visit the Oracle of Delphi. That was fantastic. And he was next to me, and I didn't go congratulate him. And I didn't have to be with him, but that was fascinating, because in Delphi, every year we have the Delphic Forum. It only, the duration is 3 days. So we've got all these names coming in. How many come to the site? Very few. But still, there are people who are interested. The question is, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to tell you the question. It depends on the time they have, it depends on the field they are in, but it's complicated with them. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's one of those examples we should remember and give to politicians. If Gutierrez goes there, why should also not European politicians go to Delphi? One of the, and I will start to wrap up, one of the other ways the notion of Delphi is used in the so-called Delphi method. And this is a method where you try to bring experts together in a structured way, where you try to engage in an exercise of forecasting, and where you try to re-examine a question over and over again for a few times, sometimes for a period of a few months, or in the case of Charter, a few years. And I don't think we exactly applied the Delphi method in the Charter project, but we did something similar. And one of the key insights in using the Delphi method is the role of the facilitators and the people who manage to bring those experts together over and over again, and then at the end come to a number of recommendations and conclusions. And I think this is the people who are sitting here. They have done this role of mediating and finding solutions over and over again. And that's something I learned as a heritage professional, that the role of these mediators, culture brokers, boundary spanners, or whatever you call them, it's crucial. It's a critical success factor, and they are critical success actors. And that's something I've learned in all those years working in the heritage field. And then I will stop exactly at the right time. So if we want to connect all these things, they all have to be translated from one point to another. They have to be combined. We have to bring people together, not only politicians, also heritage actors, people in academia, to explain this. And this is the big challenge for us today. And I think it's one of those, I like the fact that the people who organized this put this session in one of the last issues, because this mediation, culture brokerage exercise, especially translation, is something we will need in the next weeks and months. And also at all levels, in all heritage programs, that's the key to success. And I think the two people who spoke to us today demonstrated it, and you all demonstrated it in the last 4 years. Okay, thank you very much.